Welcome to Launchpad Intercessions Week 3, Managing Your Royalties. So I'm going to be discussing basically how basically how music rights break down, and then and kind of how they affect you as a creator, or someone who or someone who's releasing music or is writing music, and ways that that essentially the mechanisms that are in place to kind of monetize and make music. Uh, if you can put any questions in the chat, that'd be absolutely fantastic. I will try and go at a pace and make this as interesting as possible. And I'll try and answer as many questions as possible. I'm just going to do a quick introduction myself. Apologies if you already saw this the last time you were here, but I don't know who was and wasn't. So I'm just going to do a very quick introduction to myself. So that's me, obviously. Slightly different glasses, white, slightly more grey beard. So I have a portfolio career. So I manage a lot of royalties because I'm dealing with kind of a lot of different things. So I'm a music producer, mix engineer, and that's my studio there. My house, I'm not there at the moment. I am an artist and songwriter, so I release music into the wild via different labels. And I also do some co-writing as well. I'm a sound designer and composer mainly for theatre, so I do a lot of theatre work. Currently working across 3 different shows at the moment. I am a post-production sound editor, so I do work for ads, so some ads and some uh, um, uh, logo design, like audio, sonic branding, things like that. I also produce and edit podcasts as well. Um, uh, I'm a lecturer at Leeds University, and I also do kind of like mentoring and kind of just generally sort of this kind of thing where I talk about the music industry, which I'm very into. And I really enjoy talking about the music industry. And I'm also, this is probably the most relevant, is I'm director of Four North Publishing, which is independent publishing company, which looks after the rights of about 400 different songs. And we get things on sync, so things like Love Island and various other bits and pieces, BBC shows, things like that. So we kind of try and make our music active, and we also try and find opportunities for our writers as well. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I also always say this as well, is that I love music, and this seems like a really obvious and glib thing to say, but many moons ago I did my first ever lecture, and it was at Leeds College of Music, and a friend of a friend was in the audience, and my friend said, "Oh, my friend, so you do a lecture?" And I said, "Okay, what do you think of it?" And they went, "It's a bit corporate." And I was really annoyed by it, and I'm still really annoyed by it. And I was like, "What do you mean a bit corporate?" And he was like, "Oh, well, you're just talking business." And he was like, I was really annoyed by it because it really lacked the understanding of kind of where I was coming from. So I was sort of annoyed myself for not really making clear, like, basically I've learned how these mechanics work and what the things do. So I can basically work in music and keep making music and keep creating every single day, um, and it not just be a hobby but an actual job. So while all these things might sound really dry and really corporate, when we talk about copyright, and we're talking about licensing, and we're talking about all these kind of different things, please be aware that this stuff comes from a place of like love for music. All right. Like I say, if you have any questions about the stuff that I'm covering, please stick it in the chat. I'll try to get to it at some point, if not definitely at the end. And I hope you enjoy what I'm about to say. So I'll say there's no magic wand. We can't provide answers. We can't just go, here's the door, go through that, and that'll give you a career. It doesn't work like that. But as I always say, there's no one's going to open the door for you. You've got to build the door yourself, and that's very much how the music industry works. There isn't loads of jobs, but there's lots of opportunities, and that's a really positive thing. So let's get started on looking at music copyright. So I call this the rule of 2. So essentially, there are two main copyrights that govern the music industry. I'm talking about the recorded music industry mainly, and really without these two copyrights, the music industry doesn't really have anything to hang itself on. Everything is predicated around the ownership and licensing of these two copyrights. Firstly, there is the recording, the master rights. So there is should have done this the other way around, really. So the publishing rights. So who owns the rights and the rights to monetize a composition? I've got a better slide of this, and I should have found it. So ultimately, there is essentially the song, the composition. So a song can exist completely independently from a recording, and a so so when a song is written and put in a tangible format, and what I mean by that is it's put you write in notes on your with the chords on your phone, or you record it onto your phone, or it's a Logic session. That is what we deem as a tangible format. So we're proving that the song exists. That song is automatically owned by the person or persons who wrote the song. And the recording is typically owned by the people and the recording is separate, completely separate copyright, and that is owned by the people or persons or companies that arrange that recording and pay for it. So typically, whoever pays for it owns it. So, for example, if you record a song and that can be any song, that could be a song that you haven't written, it could be a cover version, but if you record that in your flat, you own the recording of that, not the composition, the recording of it. And that's so just to be very clear, two very separate rights. If, however, someone pays for you to go into a studio, say a record label, then they will typically own that recording. There's obviously sort of different areas, and that all depends on the deal that you might have with a label and how that deal is set up and what's been organized. But they're on a very basic level how it works. So just to kind of make that clear in a working process, the composition, the song, okay. So in 1973, Dolly Parton wrote "I Will Always Love You." As a songwriter, she owns the IP, the intellectual property on the composition. She owns that song because she wrote it. Compositions are sometimes looked after by publishers, which are companies who look after that. We'll go into those in a bit. In this case, Sony Music Publishing looks after the rights. It's certainly in the UK, according to the PRS database. Then there's the master, the kind of recording, and there are lots of recordings of "I Will Always Love You," which as you can see, I've created a list there of a whole bunch. So it's been covered lots and lots of different lots of times, and whoever paid for the recordings of those different versions owns those versions of the recording. So in practice, if we stream "I Will Always Love You" by Whitney Houston, which is arguably the most famous version, a royalty will be paid by the DSPs. And when we talk about DSPs, that means digital service providers. That's a way to talk about all the streaming services. So Spotify, Apple Music, so on and so forth, Google Play. We refer to them as DSPs, digital service providers. And so if we play Whitney Houston, "I Will Love You," for example, on Spotify, Spotify will pay a royalty to whoever owns the master of that version. In this case, for Whitney's version, it's owned by Arista Sony Music. So they will be paid, and then they will then pay the artist their royalty, or in Whitney's case, the artist's estate. No matter which version of the master is streamed, a royalty is always paid to the composer of the composition, in this case, Dolly Parton. So it doesn't matter which version of the song is played, because Dolly wrote it, she will always get paid a royalty for it being streamed. And there are other means that masters and compositions can earn royalties, and we're going to be looking into these over the next few minutes, next hour or so, a couple of hours. So there's a lot of mechanics that make this happen. But ultimately, just try and remember they're two separate copyrights: the composition and the master, and they live separately. They can work together, but they are separate, seen as separate copyrights, because there is always one song, but there can be 50,000 versions of that song in different recorded forms. Is that clear to everyone? I'm wondering if I can get a thumbs up if that's if I've made that clear enough. I'm hoping that I have. I will assume that I have made it clear, because I can't see the workspace there. All right. Hope. Yes. Well, if that I've made that clear, please stick with thumbs up and things like that. Excellent. All right. Let's crack on, shall we? And again, please make sure if you've got any questions, stick those in the chat. All right. Shut that window. So the basics of music royalties. Music creators and rights holders make money and generate royalties in multiple ways, depending on how and where their music is played and performed. And ultimately, it's about music getting used. That's what and how, and by having the right mechanism in place, when it's used, you get paid. So a music creator is always the first owner of the musical works. So, but in most cases, they will license it to different groups in order to most effectively collect the royalties attached to it. So essentially, we create work as creators, but we will pretty much always end up somehow using some kind of mechanism, whether or not that's PRS to collect our royalties, or using a distributor to get it online. And we'll look into all these in a bit. But essentially, we will potentially always use third parties in a way to kind of make sure that they've been actively monetized and collect royalties. So it starts with a song. So let's start there. Let's start with a song. When a song is written, and I've obviously covered this, but just to make it really clear, when a song is written, the song is automatically owned. The IP is owned by the writers or writer. So it all depends on who, and this can cause issues. So if there's multiple writers, and it's sometimes really important that the splits and how that is decided is how that is broken up is decided, because it can cause issues. And I've seen it cause issues. The music, to prove that the song exists, it must be put in a tangible format, as I've mentioned. So it must be recorded onto a phone or written down in music notation. It could be recorded onto a laptop or in Logic. It could even be sent. You can even record it onto CD and send it to yourself, which is what I used to do back in the day with my old, and then have a proof of stamp on across the seal, so it's not broken. It shows that it's never been broken, and when it's been sent, so you sort of send it to yourself. You can register it with a lawyer, put it in a lockbox, however ways. But essentially, you want to put it in a tangible format. And the easiest way is nowadays digitally doing it, because it's usually date stamped by a computer. The copyright of musical works can only exist when it's written down or recorded in some tangible form. It cannot exist as a mere idea alone, as musicians union put. And if you want to find out more about that, please go have a look at that website. No matter who records the song, the songwriter owns the composition. Again, I'm hammering that home, but it's really important to understand that. A writer can register themselves and the song with PRS and MCPS, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit. These are collection organizations, sometimes known as PROs, performing rights organizations. Okay, so PROs, performing rights organizations, and again, we're going to look at those very soon. If the writer has a song or a body of work that is deemed to have appeal, commercial appeal, syncability, or they feel like the writer maybe has a good opportunity to write with other people and do well, then they may be offered in form of a publishing deal from a music publisher. And again, look at that in a little bit. So recordings, when you make a recording, this is also a piece of intellectual property. The people who convened, arranged, or basically paid for the recording are the owners. This is referred to as the master. So the publishing, or is sometimes referred to as the composition, this is referred to as the master recording. If you use a service for free, it's worth clarifying your ownership of the master. So what I mean by that is, if, for example, you've gone over someone's house and you've recorded a song and your friend has recorded and produced it, there's an argument that they own the recording because you've used their studio, and there's technically they've paid for it. So it's definitely worth always checking kind of where the land is lying, or if you're using, I don't know, a public space or a public studio, what ruling do they have on ownership? They tend to usually be whoever's using it owns it. But it's absolutely worth checking on the legalities of that stuff. I assume that performers are contracted, but again, we'll look on that. That's to do with PPL. There are other processes in places to reimburse the songwriters of the composition recorded. And again, we're going to look at reimbursement on. So what I'm trying to do is kind of set up what's going to sort of how this all works, and then we're going to look at the mechanics that make this work. It's really worth saying that doing something simple like creating a writer split. So a simple arrangement can be made to clarify the ownership of the composition and master ownership. So I've done quite a lot of recording with people, and I have a very simple splits form that I use, which basically has the name, the address of the people involved, their PRS number or a CAE number, and then the splits that we all take, both for the composition and if we've recorded it, the master as well. So everyone's clear on what they own. So the commercially released and broadcast music has multiple rights. These rights are controlled by people or organizations. We call these stakeholders. So we talk a lot about stakeholders in the music industry. And basically the stakeholders are the master rights holder. So traditionally a record label, but nowadays that also can be an independent artist who is really self-releasing work. The performers and the songwriters and publishers. Okay, so these are the different stakeholders, three main stakeholders when a song is released. You might be all three of the above, and if you're maybe registered to collect them all, but you only may be the performer, or you may be the performer and the master rights holder, or you may be the songwriter but not the performer and the master rights holder. You might be one of those three. It can get confusing. But again, it's about knowing which of those you are and what you can claim on is important. Matt's asked a question, so I'm going to answer this now because I think it's relevant. So if I pay to go into a studio with a producer engineer, do I own the master, or does the engineer, or does the studio? I've always assumed the ownership is for original songs. It's not actually about whether or not it's an original song or not, because it's about the master recording, because you're paying them to record it. The composition is held with whoever wrote the song, and that won't really become relevant until it's released and put in a public space. But the recording itself, which is the most important bit, if you pay to go into a studio, then you own that recording because you've essentially paid for that service. So you're paying for the master to be recorded and for the ownership on it. Do royalties ever stop? For example, is Dolly Parton still being paid for streams to this day? Yes, Dolly's absolutely getting paid. No, royalties don't stop while you're alive, unless someone buys rights from you or for whatever reason. But ultimately, no, royalties don't stop until 70 years after your death. So if you've got a big fat hit on your hands and you die, the next generation can enjoy the profits of your labor as well. And this has been extended over the years as kind of as copyright ownership has become worth more. So yes, Dolly still gets paid, and Dolly will always make sure she gets paid, and she's very good at it. Okay. So there are three main ways income is generated through music. It's through sales, or sales, and what we mean by that is obviously a little tricky now, through broadcast and through duplication. So sales, broadcast, duplication. When a song is released commercially, these are the ways stakeholders get paid. Okay, so recording royalties via distributor or label. So let's use streaming because it's the kind of the most used way people listen to music. So when a song is streamed, there's a payment made, and that payment is a payment is made to the master rights holder, and that then that might be the artist who's independently released it, or it's paid to a label and they then pay the artist a royalty. Former royalties, sometimes now known as neighboring rights, and that's via PPL, which Phonographic Performance Limited, and that is when that is for, as a performer, and also if it's performed in a public space, the master rights holder as well. And then yeah, so performer royalties, neighboring rights via PPL as a rights holder. So I've just mentioned that. Performing royalties via PRS. So that is that is as a songwriter, if your song is performed live, and we're going to talk about the different ways this means, then you can be paid by PRS. And then mechanical royalties, when your music is reproduced onto a mechanical format or streamed, a songwriter is paid via MCPS. Very, very confusing. Lots and lots of what we call PROs, and lots of ways of getting royalties, but also lots of opportunities as well. And it can all get really confusing and really messy, and I get that. And it takes a long time to get your head into it, but it's really worth. This is the stuff where we use there's a phrase that's used called passive income, and it's a tricky one, passive, because it basically sounds like there's no work being involved. And we all know releasing music is work, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of skill. But if you can gain an audience, and it doesn't necessarily have to be significant, but gain an audience, and the audience are streaming or interacting with your music, and you can find opportunities for it to be broadcast or played in public. These are all the mechanics that you can use to make sure that you earn royalties from your music, and this is when you start earning royalties passively. So basically, it's not equitable to you going out and doing a 12-hour shift, and getting paid for that 12 hours. It's money that comes in because your music is getting used, which is kind of the dream, and it's great, and it does work, and it happens. I earn royalties, and I for different areas of the compositions and music that I have made over time, and so I know that these mechanics do work. So let's look at some examples about how all this works, kind of in a practical term. So if so you go into a shop, HMV, Jumbo, Crash, whoever, and you buy a piece of vinyl because it's cool, right? A royalty, then there will be a royalty paid to the distributor and record label. So a record label will sometimes have a distributor that distributes the music for them, and then and also the record label itself, who have manufactured and made this record possible. That money is then paid to the artist. So if an artist signed to a label, or if it's the artist is the label, they've self-released, they get that money directly. Then there's also a mechanical royalty. And this is where we start getting how the fun starts happening. So a record label should pay MCPS a license at production stage. This goes to the songwriters and publishers. So basically, this is what we call a mechanical royalty, and it's getting paid to the songwriter for allowing their music to be reproduced onto a format. We call it mechanicals because it's all started back in the day when pianolas, which are self-playing pianos, The people who made these started putting songs that were favored in music halls and vaudeville onto cylinders, which you then put into the piano, and they play them back. And that's what we call mechanic, and it's kind of a piece of mechanicals. And the publishers who own those compositions went, well, you need to pay us for reproducing those works onto a piece of mechanics. So, and that's how that started, and that still exists today. So that's why they're called mechanical royalties, and it's paid by MCPS. If your song is streamed, well, so as you can see, quite a few different royalties get paid out. So approximately 82% of distributed income is paid to the record to the distributor record label. So your song you might use AWOL, for example, who take a percentage of your royalties because for using their service, and then they pay you the rest. Or you might be paid to a record label and they pay you a percentage. Or if you're on, like something like TuneCore or CD Baby, you get all the money because they don't take a percentage because you've already paid them for putting it on Spotify. But ultimately, when a song is streamed for over 30 seconds, technically speaking, Spotify, Apple, etc., a royalty is paid to the master rights holder, whether that's the artist or the label. And then another portion, so approximately 18%, is then paid. It's actually split in two. Half is paid for what is considered a performance, because playing a record, a piece of music on Spotify is considered a performance. And then half is paid to MCPS, back to the mechanicals, for reproducing the work and reproducing the songwriter's work. And then that money is paid via those two PROs, PRS and MCPS, to the songwriter or music publisher if you have one representing you. Any questions so far? It's pretty complicated, right? But ultimately, you should see it as, in a very basic format, the master rights holder gets paid and the songwriter gets paid every time a song is streamed. But they are the mechanics of how it's done underneath that. Someone has a question, so I'm just going to have a quick look at that. Really doing it very slickly as well, which I'm really enjoying. There you go. What is the thing with MCPS exclusion if you're putting out your own CDs? Yeah, it's a tricky one. So you can sign a waiver on, because it's your own CDs. You essentially don't want to be, you might not want to pay a license. I haven't reproduced CDs for years. A lot of CD reproduction, smaller ones don't necessarily, they should, but don't always ask for MCPS reproduction. Particularly, they'll assume that you are the songwriter. But if you are using someone else's songs, yeah, technically you should be paying an amount via MCPS. You should be getting what's called mechanical license from MCPS, paying a certain amount to reproduce it, if that makes sense. I hope it does. Excellent. Okay, good stuff. Insanely ridiculous though, right? Let's get rid of that. So radio, if your music's played on radio or TV airplay, again, to both the master rights holder and the songwriter is paid. So PRS, so it's played on, so this is where it gets slightly, so it's played on radio. PRS will a PRS royalty will be paid because it's considered a performance of that song. So some money will go to the songwriter or publisher. They will not. MCPS will not be paid though, because it's not considered a reproduction; it's considered a broadcast of it. MCPS will be paid if it's played on television, and so this is where so so if it's played on television, some money will go to so it's played on TV. MCPS will be paid because it's considered a reproduction of that music. And then on the master rights side, via PPL, 50% will go to the performers, so whoever's registered as the performers of the track, and then 50% will go to the master rights holder. So if you performed on the song, 50, you'll get 50, that will go, and that will split between whoever is considered the performers. There might be just one, or there might be a whole bunch registered, and that would be split depending on who is considered a lead performer and who is considered a guest or kind of accompanying musician. Again, there's more questions around that and it gets deeper, but I don't want to get too deep into that. And then 50% goes to the master rights holder. Now, if you put the record out yourself and you've played everything, you get all of that money. Excellent. More questions. What about restaurants, shops and stuff like that, hair salons, hotels, etc., reproduce your music? Does that fall into them paying a license to do that as well? Absolutely, it does. So that would be that. So any place that plays music anywhere that's public that plays music has to have both a PRS and a PPL license, because your work is getting performed in public if you're the songwriter, and if you're the master rights holder, your music is your music is also getting performed in a public space. So they're both considered performances. So in a cafe, a bar, a restaurant. Now, depending on the size of the venue, that won't be individually tracked. So the if it's a smaller venue, it'll just fall under what's called a blanket license agreement, and PRS and PPL essentially do what kind of a sample pool about what's getting played and where and how, and then distribute accordingly. Now there is talk of this becoming more automated and better reported, because music is getting played through DSPs and things like that, and sort of and services. We can see what people are playing. So there's an argument that ultimately that music should be kind of accounted for properly. But it's smaller spaces just are covered by a blanket license. The bigger the venue, the more reporting that venue has to do, because obviously it's a bigger impact because more people are hearing it, and therefore the more money is generated, and therefore more accurate the reporting has to be. I hope that makes sense. Remember, even if you own the recording and you're a solo performer and you write the songs, you need to be aware of all these processes to receive all the income due to you. Okay, so even if you do all of these things, you still need to register with all of these things. So if you're a songwriter, you need to be registered with PRS. If you are if you also own the master rights and you're the performer, you need to register as both with PPL as both the master rights holder and the performer, so you can get paid every time your music gets played in spaces. And, it gets broadcast on radio, things like that. If it gets picked up and is used on TV, you want to make sure that you're getting paid. If you're representing artists or recordings or compositions as a manager, record label, publisher, you also need to be aware of all these sources to generate income. So it's about being aware of what is due to you, essentially. What is there for you? Because if you aren't aware of these royalties and how they're generated, you won't pick up these royalties. And again, with royalties, I always think it's cumulative. Like, particularly, on, the level that I work at, it's not that I've got one big hit that does loads and loads. I have just lots of music out there, and they accumulate small amounts of income through these different revenue sources. But that small amount of revenue can sometimes end up generating a decent amount of money. So, a worthy amount of money to be paid and get paid, and it make a difference to my life. So it's about making sure that all these processes are working for you so you can make that money. If you are the original recording owner, then you have the right to distribute your work. So if you own the recording, so you've made a recording, and it's and you're really pleased with it, you have the right to distribute that in any way you want to. Uh, if you are licensing the work, you may need to consider the following, no matter how informal the arrangement is. Okay, so licensing the work basically means giving someone else permission to either release it or yeah, to put it out in the world, or use it in a film or whatever that may be. You need to make sure that all the things are considered and put in place, because the famous saying, everyone's bros until the money shows, my friend Chris always said, which is basically everyone's fine, everyone agrees to do the right thing and the gentlemanly thing, sorry to be gendered about it, until money shows up and success arrives, and then suddenly those handshake agreements aren't always a good thing. So recorded music distribution, who is the master rights holder? So who owns the rights? Okay. And if you're licensing the music, so who has the master rights holder? How long are you licensing that person for, that music for? So, for example, you might negotiating with someone to use your music for an ad. How long can they use that music for? Like before that license runs out? How long is the agreement for managing the recordings and the retentions? So if you're, for example, if you've recorded some work, if you've recorded to work and you're licensing to a record label, it's because they really like your work, they think it's really good, and they want to put it out for you. So for example, the music I record is I license that to a label called Saint the City Records, and it's a 5-year deal. I own the masters, but they have the license on it. Um, uh, and they are going to manage that for 5 years. The retention might be also that the master runs out, but how long can they keep collecting on that master for? Because sometimes that can run a little longer because of the way royalties payments work. How long is the agreement for releasing through them? What is the options? So if you're signing, if you're, say, exactly signing to a record deal, there might be you might be looking at if you're releasing sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. How long is the agreement for releasing through them? So like is it a time bound thing or is it a release bound thing? Is it an option bound thing? So you may even make 5 records. You license 5 records. So we're going to release 5 albums with you, or we're going to license 5 albums, and after that we're finished. But how long do they retain the rights for? So for example, Radiohead, very famously, they were signed to EMI and they released 5 albums through EMI, and then they left EMI, but EMI still retains the rights on on the recordings of those 5 albums. So I think it was everything from, is it Pablo Honey to Hail to the Thief. EMI own those recordings, or certainly did, and essentially could license those and use those in whatever way the agreement allowed them to do that, including they famously released the greatest hits of Radiohead, much to the chagrin of Radiohead, because they retain the rights. And I'm not sure how long they retain the rights for, but they certainly had the rights for a goodly amount of time after Radiohead had finished their contract. I hope that kind of makes sense in a practical term. There's a question. It's such a shame that it's quite an inaccessible system for neurodiverse people. My ADHD brain is really struggles with grasping all of this. Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. And and I agree, it is thoroughly inaccessible system, and I think it's made purposely complicated. And it is a really complex system, and one that has taken me time to work through and struggle through and understand. I may also not be explaining it really well, and I'm sorry if I'm only adding to the kind of confusion on top of this. But contracts and rights management is really complicated, and I think is made purposely so people are scared by it and sign their rights away sometimes unknowingly, unwittingly, or are just scared off by it. So yeah, I apologize if I'm making this more confusing than needs be. What percentage of the royalty on the income? So how much are you earning? What are you going to get from that? What percentage of royalties are you going to earn? To release music independently, either as an artist or an indie label, you need streaming platforms, DSPs. You need to work with a distributor, and we discussed this. This was discussed on Getting Release Ready. So last time, these include the likes of DistroKid, Ditto, TuneCore, Kicker, AWOL, and many, many more. By using them, you are giving them the license to distribute the recordings and pay you any income that they make. So you can't distribute the same record with two different distributors because that is breaking the license. You are giving them the right to distribute your work, and the exclusive right now. You can within that agreement, there's and there usually is with these kind of things a takedown option, which essentially that they want if you ask them to take the works down, they will because but until they do, they will essentially distribute those works for as long as you're either paying for the service or as long as the license is in place. This is why it may appear that they own the record on social media, YouTube, and other streaming platforms, because essentially you've given the rights. And sometimes if they've registered the recording with PPL, they'll put up a kind of and you haven't put in the C and P, the copyright, and the little C's and the little P. If you haven't put your names in, they will just put their names in as the kind of owners by default because essentially they're representing the work. For smaller artists and labels, it tends to be on a per release basis. Master rights holders can also sell music direct to fans. So you can have Bandcamp or Music Glue, and you can set the revenue and price. As we've talked about, and we'll look at again with some of the audience engagement stuff. It's useful for acquiring customer data. You're not obliged to pay any additional fees for this, but if you have duplicated physical recordings, assume that you have the mechanical licenses. So actually, sorry, that answers your question. If you are releasing your own music, it is assume that you have the required mechanical licenses. So you may wish to record your music through a record label. By releasing through a label, you're granting them the right to duplicate, distribute, sell, and license the recordings. So you're basically giving them the right to put it out into the world. And also find other ways of putting it with other media, things like that. Who owns the recording, so for how long and how much an artist makes will depend on the type of record deal that is signed. Now, there are lots of different types of record deals, and we haven't got time to go through those, but it's really worth looking those up in terms of the types of deals that are on offer. How long you assigned to the label depends on the terms and the options. And I was talking about that earlier, about how long a record you might be signing to a record deal, how long that might be for, and what are the options like. So, and the options tend to be on the side of the label. So what I mean by that is that they say they have an option for 5 albums. And the option is on them, and they may pick up the option after the first album because it's sold well or streamed well, it's done good numbers. They're like, well, we'll pick up the option for the second album. But that the second album doesn't stream as well, and they drop you, so they don't pick up the options. But they essentially have the options for 5 albums if you've signed it, or 3 albums, or whatever that might be. It might just be the option might just be one single. It might be literally they're signing for one song or 2 songs. The Beatles famously were actually signed to EMI for 2 singles initially before picking up on the option to sign them for a longer deal. And there are a lot of different types of record labels, but ultimately there are 3 majors. So Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and Warner Music Group. And there are lots and lots and lots of independent labels. So I put some Leeds ones in there, including Subtext, which is my label. Come Play With Me and Monomyth. And also Launchpad as well, who release music as well. So there's lots and lots of different ways to put out music. So let's get into publishing. So publishing deals with the composition. Okay, this deals with who is representing the songwriting side of things. Oh, just Gabriella's asked a question. What happens when you're shelved by a label? That's a really tricky one to answer. I depends on the deal you sign and who you're dealing with. So sometimes that you may have there may be a retention period or an exclusivity period where if you recorded a song for a label, you can't re-record it with another label for 4 or 5 years. So there might be an exclusivity option on that. There may be that you're not allowed to sign with another record label for X amount of time. It might be that they say, thanks very much. You're free to do what you want. Go and do what you want. Who knows? Sometimes you have, I've honestly, there are many horror stories. Sometimes you have to, like they will literally hold you to the contracts because they're not picking up the option, but you can't record for a while or release music for a while because it's under the honestly depends on the label. They may just even give you the recordings and go, you know what, don't worry about it, have them. Unlikely. That's not very labely. Um, they tend not to be that friendly and nice. Certainly not majors anyway. Independents probably and maybe a little more amenable and are more likable. But yeah, it depends. Um, I hope that answers your question, Gary. So publishing royalties, like I say, they just deal with these deal with the composition side, not the master use side. Okay, so the songwriters. So publishing refers to the rights relate to the song's compositions and songwriters. There are two main royalties collected for publishing. We've talked about these: the performing royalties, so royalties when your song is performed, and the mechanical royalties when your music is reproduced. In the UK, these are collected by PRS and MCPS, Performing Rights Society, and the Mechanical Copyright Protection Society, snappy titles. So performing royalties are collected by PRS in the UK. They are generated when compositions are broadcast, meaning performed live in public, played on TV and radio, or streamed through DSPs. So essentially, these are the main ways that you will earn money as a songwriter. So performed live in public can also mean they're also played in public as well via PA systems. So if your music is performed live by a band, for example, a small gig will pay £10 per a small gig pays £10 PRS to all songwriters combined. A large gig pays 4.2% of ticketed income, which is split 80% to the headliner and 20% to the support act. You need to submit your set list through websites. Now you might be basically PRS have kind of capped venue. So depending on the size of the venue, depends on whether or not it's considered a large gig or a small gig. So it's worth mentioning that. And this also depends on whether or not you've written the songs. So you will receive some of that royalty if you've written some of the songs. If you're doing cover version, some of that if you've done a cover version, you've submitted the set, some of that money will go to whoever wrote the song in your sets that you've covered. But as you can see, it is worth submitting your set lists. And obviously with the price of ticketing going up, particularly if you get to play kind of a support act at quite a big venue, you can do pretty well. You can earn some decent money through PRS for performing your own music. Okay, so it's worth considering that. And making sure that you're submitting your music again. It's small amounts, but they're cumulative. If you're doing 100 gigs a year and you've written all the songs, or even if you've written half the songs, that's cumulative, right? That's some money. That's an add up. It's 250 quid a year for performing your own songs. Now you might go 250 quid a year, but That's money. That's money for essentially performing your own songs. That it's money you don't want to just be giving away. Income's accumulated. And hopefully, as a rights holder, what you're doing is creating income streams. So it's not just about one big one, but a whole bunch of income streams that um, pay small amounts. But you need to make sure you submit your music through PRS. If your music is performed on radio, these are sort of some of the approximate amounts of money you get. So on Radio 1, it's going to be anything from £4.50 to £10.50 a minute. It's and one extra 134 to 313, and you can see different. So radio BBC introducing is about 11p a minute. So not a huge amount if you get played on BBC introducing in Leeds, but it's still some money, and on all, and you never know because there's a PRS threshold. They don't pay out under a certain, I think it's 30 quid, or is it 50 quid? I can't remember. And imagine if you're 11p under that threshold and if you just register that radio play, you'd be getting that 50 quid in your bank account, and that might just help you, don't know, pay for a subscription or, pay for a new bit of software or update on some new strings for your guitar or get it, whatever you might be spending. So, always worth registering any performances. As mentioned, DSPs also pay performing royalties when music is streamed. So 9% of performance royalty is automatically paid to PRS when a song is streamed. This is then paid to the writers if they are signed to PRS or their publishers. So this is so if you so basically so as a songwriter, you immediately get 9% of the royalty through PRS, which is very nice. So if someone has covered your songs and has put it out, so if there's 4 versions of your songs on streaming services, then there's 4 more ways of you getting paid. So every time your song is played. So for example, which is why there's so many different versions of songs nowadays, right? Because they're really good for both master rights holders, but also for songwriters. Because if there's an acoustic version, a dance version, a lo-fi version, a soul version, like every time one of those is played, you get a songwriting stream. You want as many versions of your song out there as possible. So to continue on in the is this double up? Sorry, yes. In the UK, royalties are automatically collected by PRS. So that automatically happens if you to collect royalties, your compositions need to be registered through PRS with confirmed writing splits. So you won't receive any of these royalties if your music is not registered with PRS. And this is the key here. Your live performances need to be registered through PRS with set lists. And this is now done through an app, so it's very easy to do. You can even set up set lists that you might reproduce. So it's much easier to do now. Individual songwriter, each individual songwriter needs to join a PRS or a publisher appoints to collect for them. So if you're assigned to a publisher, you don't necessarily need to join PRS because they will collect money for you. However, you will miss out on half of the performance fee if you do, because that is automatically held back by PRS, that is paid directly to the songwriter. Again, really complicated. But ultimately, get signed to PRS. It's absolutely worth it. When radio is usually picked up automatically, so it's advisable to log, but it's still advisable to log any place. Same with any broadcasts, anything like that. Anytime your music gets played, it's worth, that it's been performed. It's worth logging it with PRS just so that it's picked up and verified, and you get paid. So that might be a live performance, might be a performance on the radio, it might be that it's used on television, but ultimately you want to be logging those performances. Let's answer this question here. So I spoke to PRS about this as well, and found some of the answers unclear. So maybe I can shed some light. You may be asking a lot of me there, Matt. If I've been playing unregistered original songs for X amount of years, Can I now register them and claim the royalties as back payment? No, they back pay for 1 full year for small venues, but if the song wasn't registered when I played them, does it mean uh, that they wouldn't be included? So basically, if you played a song a year ago, but at that point you weren't a member of PRS, I don't know. I thought it was 6 months that you could back register stuff. Essentially, go. I did that, but they have PRS have a cycle, so they have like a um like you need to register live performances by a certain date, otherwise you don't get paid on them. So it's unlikely, and I can't remember, it's usually 3 months, I think, 3 to 6 months. So I think it's unlikely anything that's from a while ago that you'll be able to claim. You need to really be claiming on them at the time, or at least sort of within the kind of quarter period, I would argue. I hope that makes that clearer. So going back to mechanical royalties. So mechanical royalties are collected by MCPS in the UK. They are generated when a song or compositions are duplicated, when CDs or vinyl is pressed or streamed through DSPs. So DSPs is considered a reproduction of uh, um, of the uh, of the song. So non-synchronous radio play. So MCPS is not played on live radio. You don't get a for live radio play. However, it's classed as duplication through the BBC Sounds app. Does that make sense? Because that is what's called non-synchronous. You are listening when it's on demand, essentially. That is considered non-synchronous because it's being reproduced. When it's played live on radio, that is not considered a reproduction. One of those rules. There are many, many crazy rules. So, for example, in theatre, do I want to tell a story? Yeah, I'll tell the story. So, in theatre, if you use a composition within theatre, if it is what's considered non-diegetic or diegetic. So, non-diegetic is that it's in the speakers that is only heard by the audience, but not in the world of the actors. That is considered non-diegetic. If it's considered diegetic, as in it's heard by the actors in the show, like it's part of their world, that's considered diegetic. You don't have to pay PRS license on non-diegetic music. It's covered by the venue license. If it's in the world of the actors, you do have to pay a license. So yeah, it's crazy, man. Crazy rules. So yeah, so the person who's saying that they were finding it really confusing, it is really confusing, and don't worry. And this is an introduction, and I really recommend you go find out more information about this to help it understood. I'm just going to answer some of these questions. So Rob asks, just to clarify, how do you collect streaming royalties from PRS? Is it automatic or do you have to report it? No, streaming royalties don't have to report streaming royalties. That is automatic. Sorry, that should be clear. It's really when I mean reporting is when your music's played live or is broadcast. That's when I would consider to register it. I think I'm due some royalties from streams, but PRS only seem to have collected for the live streams I have reported on my statement. It might be worth just chasing them up on that and kind of pointing them towards, so maybe pointing them towards the IRSC code, which is the PPL code of the songs that you think have streamed enough to generate an income from them. When I joined, well done for joining, Georgia. I registered my songs and backdated performances, so I got paid for the performing the songs from when they were backdated to. Okay, not from when I registered them, and that was backdated by half a year. So yeah, 6 months. Excellent. So you can backdate for half a year. Okay, excellent. Thank you, Gabriella, for enjoying this. I hope that good luck, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this on YouTube. And I hope it's been useful. God, every time, Ed. So back to mechanical royalties. So DSPs also pay mechanical royalties. So you also get a mechanical royalty of 9% when your song is streamed, and that's paid automatically to MCPS. Okay. Again, a lot of people aren't members of MCPS, so don't necessarily always pick up that money. You have to join MCPS separately from PRS. It's a separate membership form. So, and it's an extra £100 to join. So it's £200 for MCPS and PRS, unless you're a student, because I think they've got a really good student rate at the moment. But essentially, so you get 9% for the performance royalties and 9% for the mechanicals. So 18% in all if you are the songwriter, which is great. You know, it's a really, you know, I'd like it to be more, but we'd all like it to be more. This is then paid to the writers, or if they are signed to MCPS, or their publishers. Their publishers can collect. So if you're signed to a publisher, they can collect your mechanical royalties on your behalf, which is really important. So they can collect all your 100% of your mechanical royalties on your behalf if you're signed to a publisher. A lot of indie labels will ask. A lot of indie labels will ask you to waive mechanical royalties or reimburse them through other ways, e.g. stock. This can, so essentially, so the indie labels don't have to pay an upfront fee for reproducing your music. They will ask you to waive your mechanical rights, or they will pay you back either through stocks that you can pay, you can sell at gigs and things like that. This can be easier for small amounts where an artist aren't registered with MCPS. However, MCPS can MCPS can often chase payments for labels for previous releases. And if you want to know all about the kind of reproduction rules and rights, please go and look at their website, and that's really important. So MCPS and PRS are under the name PRS for Music, which is really confusing because it's PRS for Music, but it also covers MCPS as well. They used to be separate organizations. They joined up and became the very snappily titled PRS MCP Alliance for a while, and now it's just called PRS for Music. So people tend to think when they join PRS, they've joined PRS and MCPS, but they are separate, still separate entities that you need to join separately. I hope that made that very clear. So mechanical royalties don't happen when a song is broadcast on live TV. On live radio, but BBC Sounds counts as a stream and playback. So I've mentioned this. They also generate when music is put to a moving image. So what we call sync or synchronization. So if your music is used in a TV program, that generates an MCPS license. If it's put to film, any kind of sync, that would generate an MCPS license. So similar to master rights and record labels, music publishers can sign copyrights, compositions, and collect the income and then pay them back to the original songwriters. So much like a record label, you want them to go and exploit your work. I'm using the word exploit in the old sense of the word, which is make the most of, rather than the modern sense of the word, which is to take advantage of. We still use the word exploit in the music industries. Now, they, of course, are not mutually exclusive, but I'm using them in the old sense of the word. Essentially, what you're wanting is them to sign your copyright and exploit it. So find either artists to perform the works, or for them to go on television, for ads, for whatever that might be, but basically find usages for them, but also to collect. So I'm going to go through the basic job of the publisher. So a publisher represents a songwriter and the intellectual copyright in the form of compositions, the music and lyrics, if there are any. A music publisher will often represent many songwriters and their entire catalogs. So for example, we represent about 500 songs for Four and North. So, and that I think is across about 30 or 40 different writers. A publisher's job is to protect the copyright from plagiarism and illegal usage. So basically, if people are using your music without licensing it properly, then you're acting on that. You're also, if you think that the intellectual copyright is being breached because someone's copied it, then you have the right. Then you want your publisher to protect you from plagiarism and them earning money off what might be your composition. And there's lots of examples of that lots of artists suing, a lot of famous songwriters suing other famous songwriters. So to find opportunities to collaborate and write, depending on the type of deal. So different types of publishing deal mean different things. But if you're signed to kind of a more kind of inclusive deal, then you're wanting them to find you opportunities to write and create more music, and which will then create more income. Registered songs, also referred to as works. So we refer to songs as works as well. Particularly PRS website tends to refer to them as works. So to earn money with the PROs. Register performances. So particularly if they're performed on if they're broadcast, so tracking, and you can pay for things like tracking software as well. So now there are sort of so you can actually see whether or not your music is being used on TV and film and radio. Exploit the songs, so covers, syncs, theatre, interpolation, jukebox placements, usage in chains, so like TV, banks or supermarkets. So basically finding ways for your music to be used. We've just had a bunch of music signed over into an airline, so our writers will all get paid because the music is getting used for an airline. It's not loads, but it's some money. We've also got music on jukeboxes, and we've got our artists paid for that. So it's finding things like small ways to just earn royalties that outside probably the artist, what the artists are capable or want to be doing. So sorry, not the artist, but the songwriter. So the songwriter isn't wanting to be chasing opportunities of getting your music in an airline or in a supermarket, but that is definitely what a publisher should be doing. Track the usage of the songs, so how, making sure that we know how the music is being used. Collect, account, and pay royalties, really important. So actually, making sure that money is getting collected, making sure it's been accounted for fairly between the different writers, and then those royalties been paid. And that's sometimes easier said than done. So can registering, so registering works as well. I have had friends who have been signed to publishers, quite big, in fact, very big publishers, and some of their bigger works have not been registered. You tend not to find that with smaller publishers, I would argue. We're sort of because we're representing small amounts of catalog, and therefore kind of tend to be much more up on it, hopefully. To sign directly within oh, sorry. Have I covered all that? Yes, collect account. So traditionally, you might sign a publishing agreement to collect your performing mechanical royalties. Many established artists and songwriters don't sign to MCPS directly. They just let the publisher do that for them. If signed to PRS, songwriters will always retain 50% of royalties, the writer's share, but other collection services can collect 100% of royalties if you're not signed up. So it's worth looking at. So quite a lot of distributors now, so CD Baby, TuneCore, say they'll collect those royalties for you. You can all things like Centric, so also offer kind of short-term deals for them to do that. So there are ways of getting your mechanical royalties without necessarily signing up to MCPS. Obviously, if you get people to collect your works collect your royalties for you, they are going to want a percentage though. So to sign directly with MCPS costs a one-off fee of £100. As with the record agreements, it's also important to understand how long the agreement for managing the compositions. So, like, what is the retention? So, how long are they actually going to be looking after your work? So, you may sign an exclusive writing option. So, you only write for that publisher for 3 years. And then you can write with a bunch of other people, but they then retain the rights on those songs for another 15 or 20 years. So it's about how long they will hold on to those rights. You might even want to get out clause. One of our writers has a 3-year get out. It's a 5-year deal, but they have a 3-year get out clause if we have failed to get them any syncs after 3 years. So they have a 3-year get out clause. So, it's things like that, those kind of things. Do you still need to collect parts of your royalties, e.g., writer shares of PRS? How do you submit your live claims? So who's going to do that? Who's going to be responsible for submitting live claims? And what is the royalty on your income? So how much are you getting for them looking after your rights? I've just been asked a question here. Do you have any advice on the path to a publishing deal? So yeah, I mean, obviously, like I say, I run For Enough Publishing, so I run a publishing company. So this is something I'm very, very au fait with. Um, I feel it's a bit more mystified side of the industry from what I gather. It's about showing a good track record of producing commercially successful music. Uh, there's also a bit of catch-22, and that's confusing. So yeah, I mean, like, it's basically for us, is the music active? Is the writer active? Um, is it syncable? So can we get it on adverts, TV, film? Do we feel like we can find other opportunities for it, or is it really good? Like, how can it be used? Where is it going to be useful? You know, so it's about kind of, for us, it's about how useful that music is, like uh and about how good, obviously it's about how good it is, but like, what can we do with it? Like, it's fine, we could collect the royalties for you, no problem at all, dead easy. That's not a difficult thing. But if it's, but that should be the basics. It's how can we add value to what you're already doing? So can we find you writing opportunities? We think you've got an ability to kind of, for your music to actually work with other artists. Could your music be work on adverts? Could your music work on, in jukeboxes and airlines? Uh could your music be synced for a trailer or adverts? So we're looking at signing some stuff at the moment because we think it's really good, and we think it'd be really good for film. It's, have we got a lot of that music, or have we not got enough of that music? Do we feel we're a bit underrepresented? That kind of thing. So it's kind of, where the gaps are, all that kind of thing. I hope that answers your question, Rob. So, so remember, publishing represents the recording. Doesn't sorry, Publishing does not represent the recording. Sorry, long day. Um, these are two separate copyrights. The rule of two, which I talked about earlier. Publishing does not cover the arrangement either played on the record unless it has been written into part of the composition. Sorry, I've said, as we'll see, this will cause issues. I deleted that because we didn't have time to do it. But essentially, um, for example, so Every Breath You Take by The Police, very famous song. Sting wrote the song, but it's probably one of its most famous components is the arpeggiated guitar, like the dun 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 da 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 da. That was actually, but that part was written by Andy Summers, who's the guitarist. But he has no writing credit because Sting's argument is, I wrote a song, but without the song, that arrangement wouldn't work. Andy Summers' argument is like, but that makes the song. That might be, but that song can exist without that arrangement. I think they've come to some I say amicable, they've come to some agreements that essentially reimburses Andy Summers when on the use of when the version that has his guitar lick on it, so essentially the original recording, is used. And I think there's some agreement, but essentially Sting retains the single copyright for it. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's useful. So neighboring rights. This is a new set of rights I'm bringing here. So it's not new, but it's a new set of rights I'm bringing to the table now. So neighboring rights. And I would argue these are sort of rights that I think are starting to become much more exploited and worked. Their worth has increased a lot. So UK copyright law says that performers and recording rights holders, traditionally record labels, have the right to payments when their works are publicly performed. This is called equitable remuneration. Okay, so this usually means that if, if, uh, if, uh, if it's played on TV or film, um, uh, 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 that would be considered, but also in public spaces as well. So music is used in public spaces. Recorded music is used in public spaces, or in big shows or things, big live shows or whatever. That a PPL, or in fact, actually any size show, PPL need to issue a license for it. So essentially, when your music is performed, your recorded music is performed, then as in it's played in a public space or played on television and radio, a PPL license should be issued. These royalties are sometimes called performance royalties or neighbouring rights. They tend to be called neighbouring rights nowadays. You tend to hear that a lot. Neighbouring rights collected in the UK by PPL, the oh God, my brain's gone. Phonographic Performance Limited. Okay. So neighbouring rights collected in the UK by the PPL are royalties generated when recordings are publicly performed and related to performers and recording rights stroke master rights holders. This was traditionally the record label, but now because a lot of people make their own records, that is the person who owns the master rights hold. So it's basically whoever owns the master right basically can be, if their music is performed live and performed in public, can or on radio, can be paid by paid for that usage, essentially. These royalties sometimes called performing royalties, but neighbouring rights is less confusing. The reason why it's less confusing because there's already performing royalties for songwriters. So calling neighbouring rights just allows them to be a separate sort of ring fence as a separate copyright or a separate royalty, I should say, rather than copyright. So PPL pay royalties for recordings registered on their system to performers and rights holders, and that's split 50-50. So say if £10 is paid for a song being played, £5 will go to whoever owns the recording rights, and then £5 are paid to the performer, and then that how that performance is registered, like who is what, depends on who gets paid what, which performer gets paid what. Only rights holders can register a recording in PPL. Okay, so if you don't own the right, you can't register it PPL. Recordings are identified by an ISRC codes. Don't ask me what ISRC stands for because I can't remember. Something International Standard Rights Code, I think it might be. I think, but I could be wrong. I probably am. Someone might want to Google it and put it in the chat, but I can't remember. So recordings identified by ISRC codes. So that's the thing to remember. ISRC is really important. These can be generated by PPL or given by your distributor. So if you distribute your music through TuneCore or Ditto, they can give you a PPL number. This is the unique code for that recording. Okay, so that recording is attached to that code. Okay, so it's much like with PRS, there is a tune code that is attached to a composition or a works. It's the same with PPL, that recording is assigned that code. Now that can actually mean as well the difference between an instrumental version and a full version. An instrumental version can have different codes because they are essentially different recordings because they have different elements on them. Once a recording is registered, performers can claim them. So once a master rights holder registers the composition, a performer can claim what they performed for that record by registering with PPL. If you're a master rights holder and performer, you'll need to register both accounts. And both, this is brilliant, are free. Unlike MCBS PS, you can register for free. However, you need to print, sign, and scan the forms. I'm currently setting a label arm of my publishing company, and I have just been through this process. And actually, it was pretty easy. There was a little bit of stuff, and I phoned PPL, and they were dead nice and really useful and really friendly. But actually, the only bad bit is the US collection. So basically, you have to decide whether or not you want them to collect worldwide. If so, you have to for this whole the US tax thing. Fortunately, my business partner had already done one, so he he kindly let me kind of crib that, which is great. Because yeah, it's really boring, but you can see there its forms for US collection are confusing as they aren't registered businesses, entity, blah blah blah. But essentially, you'll get to it. PRS and PPL blanket license spaces allow music to be performed in public and then distributes the revenue back to its members, songwriters, composers, performers. So this was what I was talking about, blanket license. So smaller venues pay for a blanket license. There's also a blanket license on UK TV and radio, particularly for the BBC, but also ITV, Channel 4. They have what's called a blanket license. And what that means is they can use any composition recording. There are a few exceptions. The Beatles, Led Zeppelin can't be using the blanket license. But I think the Stones are the same. They have to have special dispensation. But pretty much anything else can be used freely by the broadcasters, and they will pay a set amount of money that's already been basically agreed. So you can't then renegotiate. If you're not registered with PRS or PPL, it is unlikely that your TV broadcaster will use your music, and probably they won't use your music because they want to make sure that everything is registered properly and the right codes there. This is partly because they don't want to get sued and they don't want to have to take music off their broadcast because someone pops in and goes, hold up, that's my recording or that's my composition. Hasn't been properly registered. I didn't give you permission, blah, blah, blah. Or I haven't been registered properly through this. They will use a piece of music, and I've been told this by editors and also and the BBC themselves. They will always use a piece of music that is properly registered with both PRS and PPL. Even if it's not as good a piece of music than a piece that isn't registered. So even if they've got a preferred piece of music they love, they think is brilliant, if it's not properly registered, they will not use it because they don't want repercussion on it. They want everything to be properly reproduced. On that as well, BBC will not now use music that isn't, unless it's under library music, which is a whole separate thing, and I don't want to get into. But basically, they will not use music that has not been released commercially. So that does not have a PPL code attached to it, that basically isn't available commercially. So they now, if your music is unreleased, they will not use it. And that's a new thing. That is about, apparently, I'm not quite sure what the ruling is, but that is one of the things. International Standard Recording Code. I was nearly there. So an ISRC code is an International Standard Recording Code. We still call them ISRC codes, though, in the same way the Beastie Boys are called the Beastie Boys. So unrelated to this part of the talk, it's okay, that's all right. But what royalties would you get for radio play on online radio stations, not traditional ones? Yeah, they would probably be covered by a blanket license. They would have to still have a relevant PRS and PPL license. They absolutely have to have those to broadcast. And so there'd be a standard amount played. Smaller stations don't have to register exact usage. It's only the bigger ones that do so. Big commercial stations or so big commercial stations or the BBC, for example, have to register what they play. So that can be quite for properly. Smaller stations, little local stations, community radio stations don't have to because they haven't got really big as a recognition as in the same way that small venues don't have to register all the music they play in the venue because that is a whole piece of admin that they haven't got the capacity to do. They'd be ruinous to do. Would you say to be registered with both PRS, PPL for TV, film music placements, or would you be apart, or could you be apart from just one organization. No, I would absolutely be a member of PRS and PPL. You need your works registered with those organizations before they get used, both of them, because one equates to the writing, one equates to the master rights. So one's composition, one's master rights. So they're collecting on two different parts of the royalty. So yeah, I would absolutely, if you own both of those things, if you're the master rights holder and the writer, I would absolutely, encourage you to join both of them, if that makes sense. So yes, you need to be, yeah, cool, excellent. These are really great questions, by the way. And I really like when people ask me questions. It makes my life a lot more fun. And yet again, the same thing. There we go. So synchronization is a growing part of our industry, and you hear about it a lot. So basically, producers of visual mediums, TV, games, film, pay for the owner's rights in the songs for the license to reproduce the recordings for performance of songs with a visual image for commercial distribution. So beyond terrestrial broadcasting. So for example, use in film, in games, that tends to be what we call sync. Sometimes television can be called sync as well. If there's an upfront fee, sync tends to mean there's a fee paid. Although some people refer to sync as, when it's on television and stuff as well, broadcast television, but not necessarily terrestrial TV, because that's covered under blanket licensing. So it's stuff outside the blanket license, essentially. So we consider that sync when there's a fee being paid. So Netflix, for example, will be considered sync because they aren't covered by blanket license. They have to pay for all the music they use in their shows. So in America, right now, there isn't really a blanket licensing deal. Broadcasts are now doing deals with publishers to use their work, and then signing a blanket licensing deal with publishers. But ultimately, as it stands, individual tracks are individually can still be individually negotiated. So, for example, for a use of piece of work that I had on CBS, on a show called All Rise, it was a background piece of music, used 30 seconds, and I was paid $5,000, which is a very good piece of business. Now that was split between the master. I co-own the master and the songwriting composition, so that was nice. I had to pay 50% of that to my publisher, who was repping us. Or was it 20%? I can't remember. There was a percentage paid to our sync rep out in the States. But a nice bit of money and I also still get performance royalties. So every time it's repeated, and it is repeated, I still get payment for the repeat of that song, use of that song. So I paid an initial upfront fee for the usage of the sync, then performance royalties every time it's rebroadcast. So very nice. Sync sometimes is a one-off fee. So like for a film, that'll be a one-off fee. Likewise with games, you might have heard about the controversy surrounding Heaven 17, that he said he was only offered $7,000 for the licensing of Temptation for the new GTA game, and how appalled he was. Now, I'm not totally sure. I haven't read about this. I've read an article or two, but it's a bit unclear what that covered, whether or not that was purely for the licensing of the master or for the licensing of the composition. In sync, there is what's called the most favored nation clause. So essentially, if a publisher is getting paid $10,000 for the sync, then the master rights holder has to also be paid $10,000. Each of the two copyrights have to be paid equally, which works great in theory. But if you get a publisher or a record label that wants more money, that means they're like, well, we want $2,000 more. That means $2,000 more also has to be paid to the publisher, which then bumps up the fee by $4,000, which and then can sometimes make it too expensive for the whoever wants to license it to use. and can then price themselves out. So it is a tricky negotiation. So for the GTA thing, for example, the guy was saying that he was only offered £7,000. Now that, and it's unclear whether that was also his share of it as well. Like, was £7,000 his share of of the overall license? What, was there another? So was it a £14,000 license that was getting split with the publisher and the master rights holder? Was it a 20 I don't know, £48,000 license been split more ways? It's unclear whether or not actually the actual main amount was more, because it might actually been 32, 48,000, which actually is a pretty decent amount for a sync. Even like for a big game like that, that's a lot, but that it would be his share of it, which I would say is, for an old song that he released in 1980, whatever it was, 2 or 4, is all right. Bit of boring, hefty question. Oh, no, it's all right. How are royalties taxed? Do you just submit statements when you're doing your tax returns? No worries, it was a bit of a rabbit hole. No, it's good, really good question. A really great question. They are taxed at normal rates, so they're taxed at they're taxed at 20% of your, they're considered an income stream. So yeah, you would just literally put them in as a form of income. If you're like me and you're doing self-cert, you just put that in as part of your bank rec to your accountant, or using whatever tax software that you use. But yes, they're just taxed at normal rates, unless you're running a company and then you're paying dividends, and dividends are paid at a different tax rate. But yeah, there you go. I hope that answers your question. But I think that's a really good and really relevant question. So yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, sync is a really big part, and it's become very attractive, mainly because it also, like getting a good sync can raise awareness, can add, we've seen what it's done to like Murder on the Dance Floor, which was sort of the big sync of last year, I would argue. So the one, it was using Saltburn, and it went back to the top of the charts. Sophie Ellis Bextor is now touring the US and various, in the Europe, and she was already touring. She'd already done decent sized tours, and she, got a fan base. But absolutely, the interest in her went through the roof. She was asked to perform in loads of places. Suddenly, that record was everywhere, and has probably earned her more money than it did first time around, purely because it got a really good sync and it was used really well. Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush on Stranger Things would be another example. But even like like I said, mentioned our music was used on Love Island. So one of our pieces of music was used in The Final, which is, quite highly watched show. Love Island is a heavily Shazam show. So we were in the top 30 Shazam songs in the world for a week, and royalty numbers, streaming numbers went right up. Which was brilliant for both the master rights holder and for us as the compositional rights holders. That was a really big deal. So they're all worthwhile. So just to kind of summarize, and by the way, I'm really happy to answer more questions if you have them, and please don't feel that make them as broad as you like about royalties as much as you want, and I will attempt to answer them for you. So please do feel free to ask some questions. So summarize, keep a record of your repertoire. What are your codes, etc. So just make sure that you're on top of, like the ISRC codes of your work, know the tune codes of your work, the ISWC code, which is assigned via PRS as well, which is for international usage of your music. If you're working with the third party, be clear about what they're doing and how long is it for. So like if you're working with a publisher, how long are they retaining the rights for? What are they doing with it? What are their responsibility? Make sure you're covering collection for all possibilities of revenue streams. So make sure you're signing up to everything you possibly can be. Yes, it's a ball ache. Yes, it's administration. but it might mean that your small amounts accumulate to a decent amount. As I've just said, small amounts can add up to a lot. It can be really confusing, and there's so many different things, but please, like, bear with it, learn more about it. I assume that you're all much more intelligent than I am, and I have managed to, learn the ins and outs of these rights, and I'm lucky enough to earn from them. Make sure you're clear where recording income is being distributed. So make sure your compositions are registered with PRS. Make sure there's an agreement on registration that covers PRS and MCPS, and make sure the MCPS is also getting covered, because if not, you're losing half of the money earned from streaming. Make sure your recordings are registered with PPL. So if they're broadcast or played in public space or used in a big event, you're getting paid for those. For just to kind of summarize on that, just like it's a big, scary, crazy thing. But once you get in the habit, once you've signed up to PRS and PPL, once you get in the habit of registering works, it becomes really easy and it's very simple. And the accumulation, the more works you create and the more stuff you create, the more works you release, the more names you're credited on, or the more recordings you own. That all just bumps up and accumulates, and you get surprises. You get the nice surprise of when next month in October is PRS, like PRS payout on this quarter. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to seeing how much I get. I don't know how much it'll be. It might be 50 quid. It might be 350 quid. It might be 950 quid. I don't really know, if I'm really honest. But I know there'll be some money, and that's all helpful for someone who is, has a portfolio career, is a freelancer. That is all useful to me. Don't let all this stuff daunt you. Like, if it helps, just take it apart. Like, but you can learn it. I've learned it. I've learned what it all does. And like I say, I'm assuming you guys are much more intelligent.